My mother had been acting very strange. I wish I never found out why. My name is Carlina White, and this is my story. I was born in 1987 and grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut for most of my life. My upbringing was good, and I got along great with my mother. After high school, my mom and I moved to Atlanta, and just a few years later, I became pregnant. I couldn't wait to have a baby and was so excited to start this new chapter of my life. One day, I went into an office to get health insurance. I knew the upcoming hospital bills would be costly, so I wanted to be protected. I handed the workers my birth certificate, but oddly enough, they said they couldn't take it and that it was forged. I went back home and asked my mother if she had misplaced it or had any other documents. This is when she began acting extremely defensive and weird. As I was growing older, I was also noticing that I didn't really look like my mother, so one day I was scrolling through the National Center for Missing Kids and I saw a picture of myself. I was shocked but not completely surprised. I called the hotline and got in contact with my real family to get a DNA test. Surely enough, I had been abducted from the hospital when I was less than a month old. The lady who abducted me was sentenced to 10 to 12 years in jail. She is now free. Follow for more stories.
Let's talk about the horrific murder of Sean Luke. Discretionary warning for pedophilia and rape. This case is extremely disturbing and the details are very graphic. The forensic pathologist on this case said that this particular autopsy traumatized her and continues to do so 17 years and hundreds of autopsies later. Please proceed with extreme caution. Apologies in advance for any mispronunciations. On March 26, 2006, 6-year-old Sean Luke was playing with his friends near his home in Couva, Trinidad. That same day, the then 12-year-old Akil Mitchell and then 16-year-old Richard Chatu were going on a fishing trip to a nearby river with some friends. To get to the river, they had to pass through a nearby cane field. This was the last day anyone would see Sean Luke alive. That day, Pauline Parath, Sean Luke's mom, awoke to find her son missing. She claimed that she found Akil sitting under a shed on her property, and he told her that he didn't know where Sean Luke was. Pauline said that she wasn't immediately concerned by her son's disappearance because he would often visit relatives who lived nearby. She claimed that Akil stayed with her for a short while until Richard and a group of boys from the community walked by her house. She claimed that Richard, who she said had also come to play with Sean Luke in the past, also denied knowing where he was. She then began going to relatives and neighbors' homes in search of her son. Pauline claimed that when she returned, Akil told her that he had seen Sean Luke going off with a tall man dressed in white. Akil's uncle and Richard's stepfather, Raymond Bruzal, who Richard had moved in with about 3 weeks prior, then came over and relayed the same information about the man in white. Pauline then gave this information to the police when she filed a missing persons report and went in search of Sean Luke's father, who matched this description. 2 days later, on March 28, 2006, Sean Luke's naked and decomposing body was found in a nearby cane field by villagers. An autopsy was performed by forensic pathologist Dr. Eslyn McDonald Burris the same day. She described the autopsy and the sight of Luke's body as one of the most traumatizing experiences she's ever had. Sean Luke was sodomized with the 53-centimeter cane stock that was pushed until it reached his right shoulder. It ruptured multiple organs and caused massive internal bleeding. According to Dr. McDonald Burris, this would have been, quote, an extremely painful death. She also noted that despite the extent of these internal injuries, Sean Luke would have survived for approximately 10 to 30 minutes before he succumbed. She described the injuries sustained, saying, quote, I proceeded to check the stock within the body and it came up through the anus, rectum, behind the bladder, through the pelvic and abdominal cavities, perforating the bowel and stomach and diaphragm, entering the chest cavity, perforating the esophagus, pericardial sac, causing lacerations to the back of the heart and right lung, and ending up in the upper chest cavity at the bottom of the right collarbone. Evidence also revealed that Sean Luke may have been sexually assaulted before being killed, since sperm cells that matched Akil's DNA profile were found in the child's underwear. Part 2 of the murder of Sean Luke. On the boy's body, there were bruises on the lower jaw. There were also 2 interrupted linear red bruises on his neck, possibly caused by applying pressure. She said that the injury to the face was suggestive of a thumbprint, or something pressed into the face and on the neck. A cord, belt, strong shoelaces, or hand could have been used with mild to moderate force since Jean-Luc was a small child. She said the pressure to the child's neck was done temporarily to incapacitate him. Blood samples for toxicology and DNA analysis were handed to the police. They were taken to a lab for testing along with penile, rectal, and mouth swabs as well as fingernail clippings. Despite Akil and Richard being arrested and on remand, the trial began 13 years after Jean-Luc was murdered. The court heard the testimony of multiple witnesses including police officers, residents of Couva, Dr. MacDonald Burris, and Jean-Luc's mom Pauline Parrot. When Pauline was asked to identify Jean-Luc's clothing that he wore the day he went missing, she was reduced to tears. She clutched her stomach, leaned over the table in front of her, and wailed, "That's my baby's underwear, his jockey shorts." The state's key witnesses were a man named Avinash Babulal, who was 17 years old back then and one of the members who went through the cane field that day, and Arvis Pradeep. Avinash said that on that afternoon he went into the cane field with Richard, two of Richard's nephews, Akil and Jean-Luc. They were making their way to a nearby river to catch fish. He said while walking through the field, Akil, Richard, and Jean-Luc diverted off course. While he and Richard's nephews awaited their return, he said he heard what sounded like a squeal, saying, quote, "like the sound when someone turns on a microphone." Minutes later, Richard and Akil re-emerged from the direction they had gone, but they came back without Jean-Luc. He claimed Richard told him that Jean-Luc was, quote, "taking a poop" and would return home after. He said the group then continued their journey to the river. However, Arvis contradicted this, saying that this diversion took place after they were returning from their fishing trip. Attorneys for Akil and Richard suggested that it was Avinash who was actually responsible for Jean-Luc's death. They questioned why a boy his age was hanging around such young children and why he didn't even bother to inform Jean-Luc's mother of the last time he saw her son. Avinash said the reason for this was because at the time he believed Jean-Luc had gone missing after they had returned from the trip. Richard's lawyer, Evan Welch, said that the villagers were on the right track to identifying who was responsible for the gruesome murder when they set fire to Avinash's home after he was released from custody. Evan said, quote, "the police dropped the ball by letting Avinash go. The villagers who burned down Avinash's house had far better instincts than the police." Going back to Akil's DNA that was found in Jean-Luc's underwear, criminal defense attorney Mario Merritt said that this did not mean that his client had anything to do with Jean-Luc's death. He claimed that at most it suggested that Jean-Luc was sexually assaulted by Akil sometime before, but that didn't mean that he murdered him. Part 3 of the murder of Jean-Luc. After being detained by homicide detectives and being questioned, Richard gave a statement that implicated both him and Akil. This statement was videotaped and played during the proceedings. In the recording, Richard claimed that Akil, who had been spending time at his home, requested that he have sex with him. According to Richard, after he refused, he reluctantly agreed to Akil's request to introduce him to Jean-Luc, who was Richard's neighbor. Richard claimed he merely held Jean-Luc's hands and covered his mouth while Akil raped him and sodomized him with the cane stalk. However, Richard elected to testify in his defense during the trial. He claimed that he had fabricated the confession and had been coerced and threatened by the homicide detectives. Richard denied any wrongdoing and claimed that Akil didn't even accompany the group on the fishing trip. He also sought to suggest that Avinash may have been the perpetrator. Justice Ramsamer Hinds, who was presiding over the case, noted that Richard's initial confession was not reliable. She said there were inconsistencies and he sought to downplay his involvement. She rejected his subsequent claims of police misconduct. In passing her sentence, she said she was certain of what had taken place, saying, quote, "in weighing all the evidence, I am sure about what happened." She said she was confident that Richard and Akil had planned to harm Jean-Luc and the fishing trip provided the opportunity to do so. She said, quote, "I weighed up all the evidence globally and I drew the strands together and I have found it all led to one specific circumstance. I am sure what happened in the cane field was a planned and frenzied assault. I am sure that accused number 1, Akil, buggered Jean-Luc before sodomizing him with a cane stalk. I believe that accused number 2, Richard, was covering Jean-Luc's mouth, making him an accessory to the crime. I believe that accused number 1 immediately after discharging sodomized Jean-Luc with the cane to cause grievous bodily harm. Why? Because of the length of the cane and the depth of the penetration." She went on to say that she was certain beyond the shadow of a doubt that Akil pushed the cane stalk into Jean-Luc's body with every thrust going deeper and deeper until it had nowhere else to go. And in order to apply that type of force, Richard lent his assistance. While the mandatory sentence for capital murder in Trinidad and Tobago is death, Richard and Akil managed to escape this fate because they were both minors when they committed the crime. It's unlawful in Trinidad and Tobago for those who are minors when they commit murder to be sentenced to death. So when it came to sentencing the duo on July 23, 2021, Justice Sumer Hinds set mandatory minimum terms for Akil and Richard at 17.5 years and 11.5 years in prison, respectively. In calculating these mandatory minimum terms, Justice Sumer Hinds started with 35 years for Akil and 33 for Richard. Richard's starting point was lower because he played a secondary role in Jean-Luc's murder. Akil's starting point was increased by 5 years based on his principal actions in Jean-Luc's murder. This included placing himself near Jean-Luc's mother after the murder to give himself an alibi. Part 4 of the murder of Jean-Luc. Justice Ram Sumer Hinds said, quote, "It is the chilling realization of the absence of remorse, worry, and fear in someone so young. I know children who are terrified of being caught. I cannot quite capture the nature of the criminal deviance of a 13-year-old in killing a woman's son and moments later sitting feet from her." However, Justice Ram Sumer Hinds lowered his sentence by 7 years due to his age at the time of the murder. He also had a positive report from prison in terms of disciplinary infractions and participation in educational and vocational programs. Richard did not receive an uplift in his sentence, but he did receive a 6-year reduction based on his age at the time of the murder and his positive prison record. The time they spent on remand before they went to trial was also deducted from the sentence. The convicts were both ordered to serve terms of imprisonment at the court's pleasure. They faced periodic reviews at the High Court every 3 years to determine whether or not they're going to be suitable for release. Their first review is set to come up for hearing on September 13th, 2024. However, Justice Ram Sumer Hinds admitted in sentencing that she doesn't believe it's in anyone's best interest for these two to be let out anytime soon. The two filed an appeal, and I also read that there may be a retrial due to alleged errors on Justice Ram Sumer Hinds' part. May Jean-Luc rest in peace.
The circumstances that led to Emmeline Nguyen relying on a feeding tube and an oxygen machine for the rest of her life are beyond sad. A lawsuit claims the 18-year-old was left unmonitored for 15 minutes after receiving anesthesia for a breast enhancement procedure. And in that time, she went into cardiac arrest, never to regain consciousness. Her family, says Dr. Jeffrey Kim, kept mom in the waiting room for more than 5 hours before calling 911.
And the doctor finally came back out to tell me that I wasn't able to go back there to check up on her. But she's still doing fine. She's young. Maybe that's the reason why she's taking longer to wake up.
I just wanted to find out the truth, what happened, and prevent this from happening to other people.
That's what her parents told the Problem Solvers a month ago. The truth, we're now learning from the state medical board, is staff wanted to call 911 right away, but were ordered by Dr. Kim for more than 5 hours not to.
She's not conscious.
When nurse anesthetist Rex Meeker did finally call 911, he didn't even know the address to share with paramedics.
7180, what's the...
Meeker has voluntarily agreed to no longer practice as a nurse anesthetist, but the state did not touch his RN license. He can still practice as a nurse, he just can't administer anesthesia. According to state documents, Meeker's anesthetic doses may have been inappropriate under the circumstances.
What's up, everybody? All right, you guys, so before we get started, if you're not already following me, make sure you hit that follow button and let's get into this tragic story. Rachel Deltonda, she was a teacher in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. So in 2008, she worked at an elementary school, and this would be her first time encountering a student by the name of Sheldon Jeter Jr. Now, remember Sheldon because later on he will reappear in Rachel's life. So around this time, Rachel was dating a man by the name of Frank. Rachel and Frank, they dated for about 8 years, and in 2015, Frank decided to pop the question. So Rachel and Frank, they're engaged, and it is a lot of mess concerning their engagement. Now, early on, they quickly got into it about a situation with a prenup, and things were just a little shaky, but they continued to be together. But on February 6, 2016, an incident would happen that would break their engagement off for good. So on February 6, around 2 a.m., Rachel was caught in a steamy car in an abandoned hospital parking lot. Now, police, they catch her in this car, and they are shocked when they see a teenager in the car with her as well. So Rachel is about 32 years old at this point. Now, the teenager she was caught with was none other than 17-year-old Sheldon Jeter Jr. Now remember, Sheldon actually went to an elementary school where Rachel taught years ago. So police, they're questioning them. They're trying to understand, why are you in the car with this 17-year-old kid? Now, Rachel tells police, look, I just met up with him. He's a friend. I've kept in contact with him over the years, and he just needed someone to talk to. So she begs police, look, please do not tell my fiance Frank. So police agree. It looks like nothing is going on. Although she is caught in the car with a 17-year-old at 2 a.m., they let her go and they take Sheldon home. So for some reason at this time, police feel like there is no reason to file a police report. There are no charges brought and everybody just goes home like nothing happened. Later on, Frank finds out about what happens through a mutual friend. Now, after confronting Rachel about the situation, that's when Rachel tells him, look, nothing happened. So Frank is kind of skeptical about this, and on February 16th, the engagement is completely called off. Now, let's fast forward a year later. That's when the chief of police actually decides to file a report about the incident that happened with Rachel and Sheldon. So what happened between then and a year later, we really don't know. But the police did file this report. So what happened that night with Sheldon and Rachel was in the system. So allegedly, y'all, Frank ended up finding out that there was now a report about the incident that happened. Frank was able to get this report. Now, we don't know how he was able to get it, but he got it, and when he saw it, he was in shock. So it turns out that Rachel did not tell her ex-fiance all the details about that night. He knew nothing about them being caught in a car, and he knew nothing about them being out at 2 a.m. So, y'all, this is where the story takes a crazy turn, because allegedly, Rachel's family believes that after finding this out, Frank then released this information to Rachel's job. Because after this report came out, Rachel then was suspended from the school that she worked at. Not only that, somebody emailed the report to the news and to the mayor. Frank denies leaking all of this information, but the family of Rachel do believe that he is the one responsible. So instead of there being an investigation into why this 32-year-old teacher was caught with a 17-year-old student, they then investigated the police to try to figure out who leaked the information to Frank. Now, Rachel lost everything behind this. She lost her friends, she lost her job, and she had to start completely over. The police in the town are now suspected of corruption. Now, later, a police officer is arrested for leaking this information. But there is still a bigger investigation, and Rachel is a witness. So now that Rachel is a witness, she's saying that she's starting to get death threats. So allegedly, there was supposed to be this big investigation into the police department and into the city. And Rachel believes that somebody was trying to threaten her and get her out the way before she was able to testify. In 2018, Rachel tells her mother, Lisa, that these threats are continuing and she is afraid of police. Now, y'all, on Mother's Day in 2018, Rachel was hanging out with another teenager by the name of Lauren Watkins. Now, Lauren was also a former student and she was 17 years old. Now, I don't know the relationship between Lauren and Rachel, but it's being said that they grew close over the years and they just stayed friends. So Lauren and Rachel, they're going out, they're about to go get ice cream, and that's when they decide to pick up another friend by the name of Tyree. Now, crazy enough, Tyree is the older brother of Sheldon Jeter. So Tyree, Rachel, and Lauren, they're out, they're enjoying the night, and around 10:30 p.m., Lauren and Tyree drop Rachel off at home. So at this time, Rachel is living with her parents. Remember, she was no longer with her fiance, and her parents were home at the time. Now, Lauren is saying that they dropped her off and they saw her put her hand on the door and was about to open the door, and that's when they pulled off. Now, sadly, Rachel would not make it into the house because Rachel was gunned down in the driveway of her parents' home. After hearing about 10 shots, neighbors and her parents rushed out, and that's when they found Rachel. Sadly, Rachel did pass away from her injuries.
She was here in New Brighton having ice cream with friends. One of them, a police sergeant's daughter. The other, Sheldon Jeter's older brother. For many, that information is crucial because we learned that sergeant was the officer who responded to that 2016 call and found Jeter, Del Tondo together in the car. Police say the night of Rachel's murder, the officer's daughter was the driver who dropped Rachel off at her home.
So y'all, this story is everywhere and everybody is tied in together. So now we found out that Lauren, the one who dropped Rachel off at home the night she was murdered, she is actually the daughter of the detective that came to the car that night when Sheldon and Rachel was caught. Now, quickly after Rachel's murder, they named Sheldon a suspect. Now, they also said that they were interested in Frank, the ex-fiance, but mainly they were looking at Sheldon. Frank did come out and do a statement with his lawyer, and he said he had nothing to do with Rachel's death, and he said that he hoped that whoever killed Rachel is caught.
When police found her and a then 17-year-old boy parked on the grounds of the old Aliquippa Hospital. That young man is Sheldon Jeter, now 20, a former Aliquippa basketball and football star who still lives in town. According to this police incident report, the car windows were steamed up and Jeter was reclined. But Del Tondo told the officer she was counseling Jeter, whom she's described as a former student. Catropa and his attorney addressed the matter, saying the breakup with Del Tondo had nothing to do with Jeter, and Catropa knows nothing about the murder.
We wanted to be very, very clear publicly that Frank Catropa has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with what happened. When you're with somebody for 8 years, that's quite some time, and you just hope to see that they at least get justice to this. And it's a sad case.
So a day after Rachel was murdered, police went to the home of Sheldon Jeter. So investigators claimed that once they told Sheldon about the murder, he had no emotions about it, but he did turn over all his clothes he wore that night, and he turned over his cell phone. Now, that's when police found shocking text messages that Sheldon was sending to his brother Tyree. Now, remember, Tyree was with Rachel and with Lauren that night when they went to get ice cream and hang out. Turns out that entire night, Sheldon had been texting Tyree trying to get their location and even going to places where they were, but it was like he was too late. In those text messages, Sheldon would go to a place and be like, oh, well, I guess I'm too late. Y'all are not here. And he kept asking Tyree for their location. Now, y'all, this story gets even more twisted because we find out that Rachel was actually in an active relationship with another brother of Sheldon and Tyree. Sheldon and Tyree had an older brother by the name of Rashawn. And Rachel had been in an actual relationship with Rashawn for over 6 months. Now, at the time of Rachel's murder, Rashawn was actually away on vacation. But he did tell police that he believed his younger brother Sheldon was extremely jealous of him and Rachel's relationship. And y'all, at this time, everybody is looking at Sheldon. They believe that he is the one responsible. So for years, Sheldon denies being responsible for Rachel's murder. But crazy enough, 2 years later, Sheldon would be accused of a whole nother murder. Sheldon had a roommate by the name of Tyreek Pugh. And 2 years after the murder of Rachel, Tyreek was found dead as well. Sheldon was later charged, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his roommate. And y'all, this made investigators look at Sheldon even more for the murder of Rachel.
We do know that Sheldon Jeter Jr. is the primary suspect in this case. He's been charged with criminal homicide. Now, police don't know a motive at this time, but they do know that both he and the victim knew each other well. In fact, police say that Jeter and the victim, Tyreek Pugh, lived with one another. Over the weekend, investigators were at the home gathering evidence.
So although they are now questioning Sheldon again about the murder of Rachel, they still have no suspects, no leads, and no other information. Now, y'all, this case is completely crazy because Sheldon is now already serving life for a whole nother murder. Now, the fact that Frank actually is being accused as the one that leaked the information about Sheldon and Rachel, a lot of people were looking at him. But a lot of people think that her death might have something to do with that investigation into the Aliquippa police. People say that her death looked like it was a hit. And whoever did that to her had to have been following her and knew that she was going home at that exact time. Now, did Sheldon know that she was going home at that exact time? I think that if police could have proved that Tyree texted Sheldon and told him that exact location and time that they were dropping her off, then maybe they could have charged him. Investigators are saying that he was obsessed with her. Could he have been waiting at their parents' home and just killed her? But what's odd is she had been dating the older brother for 6 months. So her going out with Tyree, the other brother, wouldn't have been really surprising because she was cool with the family. This whole case is just bizarre. Now, since we know that Sheldon is capable of killing, he is in jail for murder, do we believe that Sheldon is the one responsible? Or do y'all believe that something more sinister happened and somebody else put this hit out on this teacher? Comment below, you guys, and let me know your thoughts on this crazy case.
you? It took me. What? It took my daughter. Parker? Please let me inside. Parker!